All right, good morning. We're just going to go with it. You just got to go with it. That's the thing we learn, right? So, we're going to start out on the downside. So, sorry, it's a little trigger warning, right? Because for the long time now, we've kind of all been stressed, right? Hopefully, maybe. Ah. So there's been a lot of things that have been going on in our lives over the last few years. So one of the biggest things that have been going on is there's been 400,000 people at least who have been laid off since 2022. We've dealt with COVID. We're still dealing with COVID as it resurges. We've dealt with other types of, I can catch up maybe. Oh, we can catch up. We've had a war in Ukraine. We've still not catching up. Oh, it teases, which is also stressful. We've had coups, we've had Me Too, we have El Nino and other climate crises. Politics is crazy. People are just mean now in politics, right? It's just not working out the way we want it to, the way we need it to. Israel, Palestine is just what's going on there. Whatever side you feel you're on, it's stressful, it's crazy, it's pulling our attention. Billionaires just taking all of our money and not putting anything back. They call it trickle down theory, but like nothing is trickling, the faucet is off. Hurricanes caused by El Nino and other types of climate change, and fires. There's this new thing called firestorms, where even like bushfires are changing because of climate change and the extra dryness and winds that have come up. So we're all stressed. And when we're stressed, it impacts our decisions, our behaviors, and our actions. We don't necessarily think the same way. And I want y'all to kind of like try to remember that as we move forward through this conversation. Because it's a big part of why things are the way they are as we move forward, is thinking about this constant stress that we live under. So, I've come up with this new designation, BC19. It's our life before COVID, right? I want to talk a little bit about that. So, I want us to remember that life before COVID wasn't all perfect, right? Our workspaces and where we worked and how we worked weren't necessarily the things that we wanted. Oh man, that was a good slide. Okay, so we argued about the open work plan. It was like whether it was good for us or not good for us. This is gonna kill me. It's killing me. Thank you all for your empathy here, right? Yeah. Woo. So open floor plans that we were like all pushed together in like, living right next to each other. It was loud, it was distracting, we couldn't focus. Some of us were in cubes where we got to be meerkats, poking our heads up and asking each other, how are you doing? But still disconnected. But what we really wanted was a space that was creative, like this studio that IBM created in Seattle. And it had like focus areas and collaboration spaces and playful spaces. But what we really wanted was wall space. That was the holy grail of our work environments. If we could have wall space, we would be fine if we would go to the office. But we never got it, right? It was impossible to get. So one of the things that was going on before COVID was the tech talent wars. People were hiring like crazy, and it was super, super competitive. We came up with this phrase called FANG to describe those companies that were the epitome of not just like great design work, arguable, but also like they had all the stuff we wanted. They had great salary, great food, like it was all there when you had those companies. And they caused this huge jump in salaries for designers, right? We were like competing with engineers one for one. A lot of companies, we were just like, we just needed people to be there. We just needed butts and seats. And so they were lowering the quality bar, right? And so then it became acceptable to have the boot camps come in and say, hey, if you come for 10 weeks, you are a designer. You're ready after 10 weeks. Yes, you were a chef beforehand, or you were a movie cinema manager, but after 10 weeks, you could go get a job because they just needed butts and seats. There was a lot of acquire to hire. We were hiring design studios into places so that they could just have the designers in place. And the other thing is to accommodate all of these new employees is they would do major build outs. One company, Amazon, even wanted to have a second headquarters. And in the United States, they asked cities to compete for the honor of having their second headquarters. New York won. It did win, except New York City revolted and said, we don't want you. You are just going to cause traffic and noise, and our subways can't handle it, and blah, blah, blah. So we said no. So Arlington, Virginia won in the end. Diversity became something that organizations started to track, and they realized they sucked at it. They were not good at it at all, whether it was representation of women or people of color or neurodiversity, all the things that they started to track, they weren't doing very well, and it was just the usual suspects of people who look like me. But they wanted to do better, and they were trying to hire for better. Some companies said, we can do better than all of this. They're what I call the dreamers. Automatic, Zapier, GitLab, DigitalOcean, and some others said, we could be remote first. We don't need to have an office. We can be more diverse because we can hire from more geographies. We could be respectful of women because we know that they're the primary caregivers in situations, and being home is important for those demographics. We can be better by being remote. Very few companies were able to do this at the level that these companies were, but they became companies that we wanted to try to emulate. So companies that weren't like this would look at these models and say, hey, can we do it a little bit? Like, we have these offices, but we want to know how you do it so that, like, if we needed to, we could. We were distributed. No matter what happened, we were distributed because all of these offices, because of acqui-hire and because of trying to diversify, we started having all of these new offices, which meant we were distributed. And then we added remote people to try and diversify. And so we were distributed. No one was in the same place. Our teams couldn't be together anymore. And so we would look at those remote companies beforehand and we would say, how can help us do this? But there was a revolt. Marissa Mayer, while she was at Yahoo, said, no, everyone's got to be in the office, and I'm going to check. I'm going to take attendance, and I'm going to make sure that you're coming into the office. Other companies did this too. I was at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and one day I got a notice from my boss saying, I heard from HR that you're not coming into the office enough. And I'm like, what? They were checking my badge-ins to see. I was like, but you're all in Seattle. I'm the only one in the Austin office. Why do I need to go to the office? It made no sense. But they needed to do some stuff around real estate. So that's why they did that. Apple built a whole new campus to accommodate as many of the people as they can as possible, spending over $1 billion on this beautiful campus. So that was some of the things that were going on for us in terms of where we worked and how we worked before COVID. And then COVID happened. Can you imagine you had this space and you couldn't use it for 2.5 years, right? But they went out of their way to show it off in every keynote speech, and they still do, to kind of still make that happen. Oh well. Investments in real estate is a big issue. But during COVID, we had to deal with babies in our Zoom calls, people just in their lonely apartments by themselves, people having to be sharing space with their partners, right? That partner who was the salesperson, who's always on the phone and speaking really loudly all the time, right? There was some good stuff. We didn't have to commute. I don't know what it's like where you live, but I had a 2-hour commute to New York City. I was so happy to work from home. It was like, this is great. No commuting, no trains, no transfers. It was great. A lot of people talked about soft pants. I really didn't get that as a guy, but I heard it was an important thing for others. But some people went really kind of all the way with it, with no pants, That one was more relatable to me. TMI. Delivery and takeout food, right? It was all we could eat was takeout food because we were so sick of cooking for ourselves every day. We had to do more delivery. The rise of all of these delivery companies like Walt and Grubhub and DoorDash was because of COVID, right? The introvert's life. So many of my introvert friends were so happy to just be isolated and not have to deal with people. You mean I don't have to talk to another human being today? Oh my God, it was so cool. That's what I heard. I'm an extrovert, so I didn't really understand. But that's what I heard. Binge watching was a big thing. It's all we could do. We can't go out anywhere. We might as well just sit and watch whatever we want to watch, right? Over that period. I became the biggest anime junkie ever, was my thing. Still am. Haven't stopped. Total addict. Family time. For those of us with families, that we were able to really be with them and spend that extra time that we weren't doing because we were on a train for 4 hours a day beforehand. Now I wasn't. I was able to spend that time with my kids, and a lot of people were able to do that. In certain areas, they created these education pods, which meant we had these micro communities where we made these promises to each other that we would test and we would be clean and be good, and so we can be together in an educational setting with our kids. So we weren't just doing the homeschooling alone. But there were issues that we had to do. There were stresses during this time. Homeschool, so the pods thing changed around. Having to be with our kids and help them get through it. I felt kind of lucky. I didn't have a young child that was remote during that period, but I couldn't imagine having a kindergarten, first grader doing school over Zoom. How do they pay attention? So parents needed to be there and be attentive and do their own Zoom meetings at the same time. I was completely impressed with those parents who were able to do that. Loneliness. Even the introverts became lonely. I mean, there's only so much isolation any of us can take, right? We wanted to be with each other. This is my first talk in person since February of 2020, right? It's pretty impressive. Zoom fatigue, where we had to be on camera and we had to look good because the camera was zoomed in and anyone could see our zits, right, all the time. And then it became this whole thing turn off your camera is acceptable so that you wouldn't have as much fatigue and stuff. But then there was sort of this little kind of people not paying attention because their cameras were off, right? But they forgot to mute their mics and you could hear them typing, right? You know, that happens. Not me, of course. I paid attention. I was involved. There was no escape. Whoever we were locked in with, we were locked in with. You know, that's who it was, kind of thing. But some people found peace. Some people were like, you know what? I live in New York City. I don't want to live in New York City. I lived in New York City because of my job. I'm going to go move to Vermont. I'm going to go move to the Virgin Islands, or I'm going to go wherever I want. Because you know what? Have computer, have Wi-Fi, will travel. I can go anywhere. And some people did move away, and they found some peace because of that. Some people found time for themselves. They were able to take that commute time and say, I'm going to be healthier now, or I'm going to do my family and put my family centered. Right? So they found these really good things. There were deals made with companies that we worked for. When we made that move to Vermont, we said, hey, can we move to Vermont? Is this okay? Because I want to be there. This is awesome. This is what I want to do. I want to set up my life and figure out my balance between work and life for myself. And you, company, Corp A, said, yeah, that's fine. And then the layoffs started. So like I said before, over 400,000 people have been laid off since the beginning of 2022. And it's continuing. If you want to go to this site that tracks it, it's called layoffs.fyi, right? They just keep tracking it. If you just want, talk about doom scrolling of the worst kind, that number just keeps adding. It doesn't go down. But at the end of COVID, well, COVID has not ended. Let's get serious here. At the end of the lockdowns, right, which is what we should talk about, everyone knew there was going to be change. They knew that something was going to change. We couldn't stay the same way, and we shouldn't have. But our bosses, the executives, said, if we're going to change, we're going to decide what changes. We're going to make that change happen. But there was a broken trust because at first, at the end of when the lockdowns ended, companies were like, we're going to be remote friendly. We're going to let everybody stay where they are. If you said you were going to go to Vermont, that's fine. If you're just going to work from home so you don't have to commute, that's fine. More and more companies did that. There were a few that were like, you're coming back right away. But a lot of companies said that, and then they changed their minds. They broke the trust. But they don't think that they broke that trust. What they think they said is, we said that would be remote until we figure out what we want to do. We just said you didn't have to rush back. But we've given you a year now to figure this out. So now it is what it is. And we were like, no. We like it this way. We want it this way. And it's actually shown to be better. And here are the stats to do it. But there were things going on that people at the executive level cared about more than they cared about being remote. The central business districts were empty. Entertainment and hospitality that were in these areas, these businesses, were collapsing. empty real estate. So these office spaces were just being empty, and people were giving up their leases if they could. Investments suffered. You have to imagine that huge companies invest in diversified funds, but part of that diversified fund is in real estate. They were invested, literally, in the success of the real estate markets. So they needed to push forward an agenda. So they needed to do something. And there was a big public relations campaign that came out. All of a sudden, there were all of these articles about how productive people are when they're in an office and how much happier they are to be connected and they're getting work done when they're in the office. It was all bullshit. Because when you looked at those studies, they were incomplete, they were inconclusive, and people were just pulling out nice quotes to make it work. And they were looking at activity, they weren't looking at value creation. This ad was something that was this very weak. I hadn't seen one for a long time. And this one was in the insider section of Forbes. You know, making it about generations. We're gonna lose the Gen Z folks, the young people, younger workers, if we don't keep the offices open. So then it starts pitting generations against generations. That always works well. There was a small backlash. People were like, look, you make me come back to the office, I'm not gonna come. So there, I'm just gonna go find a job. But remember all those layoffs that were taking place? It's not so easy to find a job. So those backlash people, some were successful at doing it, some weren't, right? So has return to office been paradise? Legacy remote people are still there. Offices are distributed around the world often. We still have offshoring that we had, so our teams were still distributed in that way. Set hybrid days. Talk about an attempt to show that you're being flexible in the absolute most inflexible way you could do it, right? So you have to be in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but your kid's soccer happens to be on one of those days. So that's the day that you can't commute, that you need to go home, right? It didn't work. So then they were like, oh, personal choice hybrid days. We don't care as long as you're in the office for 3 days, just whatever works for you. But then you're still distributed because you didn't go to the office and your friend did on your team. So what did that do? Fuck it, it's just remote anyway, right? So there are some positives to being in the office, which are true, like they're real. Emotional connection, being together works. Networking is easier when you're trying to influence. Collaboration is better. And a manager's favorite thing is oversight. There are some realities to return to office. You can only manage, excuse me, you can only manage so many connections as a human being. So if you work in a large office or you're in large teams, the numbers make a difference. If your office is so big, like that Apple Big Donut, the distance starts to matter. Anything over 100 feet is considered remote. It's true, because you're not there all the time, right? We really don't collaborate that often. Like, when do you need to be with somebody in your day-to-day job? Is it every day? Really? I don't think so in my experience. Networking actually isn't that hard to do remotely. You might need to put a little extra effort in, but once you get used to it, it's really not that hard to do it. And there's the limit of diversity and limited quality of life. So I'd like to put out this idea of fluid and flexible. It's not remote, it's remote first. Some people may be in office because that's what they prefer. Some people may be somewhere else. They may be at home. They may be in a co-working space. They may just like to go to a cafe to work. They may be in someplace different every day. It's the right thing to do. One, it improves diversity and inclusivity. You can help caregivers, people who are neurodiverse, other types of disabilities. They can have their personal accommodations that they use every day in their home. It helps with geographic diversity. Some question lower salaries because some have made being remote a benefit, so they make it a value. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, but it is something that's come up. Many organizations are distributed anyway because they have more than one office. So even if you say we're going to work in a hub, you're distributed. Work-life balance is better for people. Sustainability, because people aren't going in cars to get to work. They're not commuting, right? Reduced real estate costs if you are able to get rid of your leases. Illness. It's the whole point. We locked down to not spread an illness. But you know what else happened during those two years? People had less colds, right? We just weren't sick. We weren't getting sick at all because we weren't coming together in mass and spreading that illness because of the commuting and because of being in the office. It helped in that way. It helps in that way. Some principles and values to think about. This is about being employee-centric. There was a great article years ago by Richard Branson, who is the founder of the whole Virgin conglomerate. And he said, I'm not customer-centric, I'm employee-centric. And if I can make my employees happy, they will take care of my customers better. So I'm going to be employee-centric. It's about choice. It's not about saying like Automatic does that we don't have any offices, we're all remote. No, some people are better remote and some people are better in an office. Give people a choice and create spaces that allow for diverse ways of working within those real estate investments that you have. The company to be looking at there is Atlassian. They've put a huge investment into thinking how they wanted to be fluid and flexible and be remote-centric. There's some great articles that they've put out around that. Be remote first means sort of like mobile first, but be remote first, meaning that think about what you're going to do for your remote employees. And by remote first, think about everyone is remote. Even if it means for a day that person who's in the office all the time, well, every once in a while they're not going to be. Digital spaces over physical spaces. You have to be digital first when you're thinking about creating spaces, and there's lots of software out there that helps with this. No in-person conversations after a meeting ends. Let's say 3 of you are in the office and you're in the conference room and everyone else is remote. If those 3 people start talking after the meeting's over, they're taking advantage of their privilege of being in the office, which means they're deprivileging the people who aren't in the office. So you need to stop that conversation, self-police it, and say, take it to the Slack or take it to Teams and continue the conversation there. Favor asynchronous communications over synchronous communications. Don't need a meeting for everything. You don't need to meet at the same time. Respect time zones, remove the privileges. If you have a team that is far away, wherever far away is for you or for your team, share the burden of time zone shifting for whatever meetings you do have. And you need to have benefit parity. And this is an important thing. So if you were in an office, let's say in New York City or wherever, and there's a commuter benefit where you get like a free monthly pass, right, that's paid for by the company, if you are work from home or work from wherever, that doesn't help you. So now you have privileged people who are in the office. Well, pay for internet. That's their form of commuting. Give them that benefit back. If you have food in the office and you're catering whatever one time a week or multiple times a week or every day, as I've had in some offices, well, figure out how to give snacks to the people who are working from home all the time. And this can go on in all these different kinds of parodies of benefits. You need to think about performance over attendance. What matters is how somebody performs and the quality of the duties that they do. What doesn't matter is if you can see them doing it, right? Trust over oversight. When you are in person, the main purpose, not the only purpose, the main purpose of being in person all together at the same time is to drive connection. Transparency and openness. So in order to remove that oversight, you need to be transparent. You need to have ways that people can monitor what you're doing, how you're doing, what the status is of what you're doing, so that they can see that and feel comfortable with it, right? It also requires openness. You need to be interruptible. You need to be open to people coming to you very often. They need that access over you claiming you need focus. People need to have that because there's no sense of presence when you're in a remote first environment. So moving forward, to kind of close through this, for managers, stop micromanaging, evaluate performance over attendance, empower teams to set their own terms. What do the teams need to do that? Coach towards results while providing clear direction. Respect an individual's diverse needs. Individual needs are important, and productivity is not equal to value creation. You want to focus on value creation more than are people being active in what they do. And for everyone else, think digitally, think asynchronously, create moments of connection where you can. Keep calendars and project tools up to date so people can see what you're up to and your availability so they know what you are doing so that they can collaborate with you. Over-communicate wherever you can and just be empathetic to your peers. They're different from you. You don't know their lives and what they're dealing with and how their struggles impact what they need, and that might not be what you need, and that's okay. Thank you. Preguntas?